Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Deborah Montoya from the Imperial County SELPA. I'm happy to be here today with you all as we tackle yet another topic regarding all things improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can delve in to our topic for today. And again, this session is brought to you through a grant funded through the Imperial County SELPA, California Department of Education, and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. You do have the slide deck and the Padlet with all of the resources that we'll be discussing today. As this is a 1 hour snippet for administrators, this session does go relatively quickly. And then additionally, we'll give you all of the resources that you are more than able to remake and reuse as you see appropriate. So utilize the QR code. It is a running Padlet. So if you were to have missed any of the previous sessions or any of the upcoming sessions, don't worry. All the resources are included within the Padlet. And a huge thank you. I should introduce myself again. I'm Dr. Deborah Montoya here at Imperial County SELPA, and I have my great colleagues with me, Lupita Olguin-rubio, who is a coordinator here at Imperial County SELPA, and she'll be moderating today's session, as well as Christina Zavala, from Imperial County SELPA, who will also be helping to moderate. So feel free. Tell us your name, the district, county office, or SELPA, whom you serve in your respective community, and what your position might be. We always love to hear who is in our sessions, as we absolutely value the collective commitment that we see out in California as we try to emulate and model here in Imperial County SELPA. Myself, having been a school psychologist, principal, director of special education, and now in my role as a self-administrator, Lupita Olguin-rubio, coming to you with experience as an EL coordinator, curriculum coordinator, and Christina Zavala, having been a school psychologist and a district special education administrator. We work together to bring our knowledge and leverage the information that we've learned and gathered from the field, all things in relation to serving multilingual learners and students with disabilities. So here we are. Feel free to reach out to us, contact us. Those are actually our direct emails and phone numbers. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're here to assist you as we all work together to serve our students. Where are we? Imperial County SELPA. So we are in the very eastmost southern corner of California, working within the California system of support. We are but one entity serving, amongst others, LEAs, COEs, and SELPAs to assist and support. Our specific topic, though, being Imperial County, it is improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. So that is our focus. Although today's focus is all things to do prior to referral, when there are those potential suspicions that the student may be suspected for a disability. There's a lot to think about and consider, and why. As you see here on this slide, who are English learners with disabilities? Well, what we know is that English learners are those students. You may hear them referred to now as multilingual learners, English language learners, dual or bilingual learners. Again, we may use those terms interchangeably, but by definition, students who have a home language, a native language other than English. So as we focus on students, we want to be clear that having a language other than English, being a multilingual learner in and of itself is not a disability under 504 nor IDEA. What we do know, however, is that some students who are multilingual learners may have certain behaviors, learning styles, or skills that represent themselves and may look like a disability. So when we refer to students with a disability, we truly mean those students who have been assessed with validity and reliability, and who are students who fall within those 13 disability categories under IDEA as a student with a disability. So for all intents and purposes today, our focus again is to think about our students who are multilingual learners and what happens in our respective systems at each and every school site where there may be perhaps a suspicion of a disability. What I always want to share, though, is that our grounding document is the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. The guidance provided in the Practitioner's Guide does represent all state and federal mandates, which we'll share with you today. But in addition, we may also share with you again best practices, our experiences collectively, as we again to assist you with best practices always knowing to refer back to your EL master plans, your schools, districts, board policies as well. So let's jump into Chapter 3. Chapter 3 of the California Practitioner's Guide is on all things pre-referral and referral. So, in this particular chapter, it is all about the referral process. So, that will definitely set the tone as you consider whether your respective role is at a school site, if you are potentially at a county office, SELPA, working in our system together and identifying what are appropriate referral practices and what potentially aren't. So, as we consider policy versus practice, written and unwritten, what does that look like in your respective role? So, as administrators, we focus on these very important questions. What is the process to ensure that a special education referral for English learners is appropriate and that does not lead to over or under identification of English learners for special education services? Because what we do know is that the research has indicated that in the early grades, those K3 grades, we sometimes may see under identification, whereas fourth grade and over, we may see an overrepresentation of English learners identified as students with disabilities. So, in our work as administrators, it's important that we acknowledge our role and how we can ensure that we are meeting state and federal mandates, as well as our child find requirements for English learners and students with disabilities. We also have an infographic, so albeit all of this information is contained in one really nicely packaged infographic. They are downloadable from our website and are also included in the Padlet. Vanessa Lopez, our fourth colleague on this grant work, did a tremendous job on putting together all the information in this particular infographic, which you may download as blocks. You can download them as your own presentation slides, which then you can reuse, as well as today's video and the resources we're sharing with you today to retrain, utilize, to support your staff again as you see appropriate. These resources are available to you. So, as we look at Chapter 3, again, identifying the factors in the instructional environment, very important as we consider English language proficiency. How are students progressing academically through comprehensive ELD, through interventions, whether there are behavioral or other extraneous factors that are, again, working against perhaps the student and causing impediments to their learning, when yet it may or may not be a disability, which becomes very difficult as we try to disentangle the needs associated with students who may have a disability and the needs of an English language learner. So let's take all things prior to referral for special education. As you can see on this referral wheel, as we call it, what the process looks like. We do know that a referral can be made at any time by anyone when there's a suspicion of a disability. What we want to focus on today is identification of what that profile may look like and what's the team process and dialogue, collaboration, and communication as they identify the needs of the student, identify pre-referral practices, progress monitoring of those interventions and practices prior to any considerations for special education or the suspicion of a disability. So we'll walk right into what pre-referral data sources look like. So at the forefront of your mind, you're already anticipating what are the needs at my site? Who makes up your student study team, your student success team? Given all of those factors, what we do know, and we want to ensure that we say this early on, is that multilingual learners may experience various academic or behavioral challenges. We know that school-based teams are at times challenged with identifying resources and supports needed by our multilingual learners. So as we consider the review of data and identification of very unique needs of our students, we want to ensure that we all acknowledge that all students who are multilingual learners are learners, do have language, and can succeed at different rates, at different needs. But again, all of our students can grow and learn and gain English language acquisition skills. So when we come to the table, it's so important that we have the right friends, that we respectively acknowledge all of our backgrounds and skill sets, that we need the supportive structures from the onset. So, whether you call your teams student success teams, student study teams, etc., we want to ensure that as we consider the needs of multilingual learners, that these truly are multidisciplinary teams. So, referral may be made by a staff, a parent guardian, counselor, etc. But as we gather around that table, whether virtually or in person, that we consider the general education teacher, the administrator, perhaps that's yourself. Maybe you wear multiple hats. We absolutely encourage that as we consider the needs of multilingual learners, that the team also include an EL specialist. That might be an EL coordinator, perhaps it's a literacy coach with a depth of knowledge regarding second language acquisition, the ELD standards, what the ELD adoption looks like, what are those benchmarks associated with assessments, a trajectory of pacing and learning and guidance through your ELD adoption. That information will absolutely be valuable as you further consider the needs and the supports that the multilingual learner may need. So, from the very onset in your student study team, it's not only that we are looking at the needs of the student, but we're also acknowledging what are the needs of the professionals around the table to fully support the student for whom we're discussing in that moment. Again, knowing that each individual student is, in fact, that individual. So, part of the process as we consider things all prior to referral, and you're seeing on the screen student file cum check. You're thinking, we do that. We absolutely do that. That's part of our processes, part of our structure when we are coming to the table, whether it's an SST team, a student success team, even if you're thinking potential refer for special education or not. But that cum file check is very important that we look deeply at the student's history and other mitigating factors that again may be causing disruptions in the student's learning that may be positive and or perhaps not so positive, where the student needs additional support. So it really does start here as we gather information regarding the student. The LPAC score is again very valuable to us. Student summative LPAC scores are trickling in, and you're looking at that information already by domain. You're looking at that information in past years if the student again has been enrolled several years within your system. So as you look at that information, we'd want to gather again what have been previous strategies. Is this a student who perhaps in prior years has also been a topic of consideration, discussion through interventions in the SST team? So, as you consider all of these factors, we can start here. This will ground our conversation. This particular form is part of the California Practitioner's Guide and it is downloadable and fillable. So, feel free to rebrand it, use it as you see appropriate. If again you're feeling that you need a form just to come around the table with and get you started in this process. The next feature that we look at is extrinsic factors. So, as we consider the needs of the student, this is where we dig a little bit deeper. As a multidisciplinary team, we want to identify targeted needs in this process. Extrinsic factors, again, impact students not of their own fault, but are affecting the students' learning, growth, self sufficiency. What is it that is, again, a potential factor that is affecting the student's progress? So, when we think about factors that are unique to multilingual learners, these may not be that unique. As you think of extrinsic factors, many students who are multilingual learners or not multilingual learners may have extrinsic factors that again are delaying their progress. So, as we think of physical and psychological factors that may impact learning, this particular form, again, downloadable and usable, they are all found in the Padlet that you received today so that you can access these resources. Because when we think about extrinsic factors, we want to know if there are any existing physical or health conditions that potentially are affecting the student. Are there any pre existing social, emotional, mental health factors, psychological factors where we may also lean in and respectfully request that our school counselor, our school psychologist, and other supportive partners are also engaging with us in thinking about interventions that the child may need? The extrinsic factors that students find might also be health related. That again, perhaps a lack of healthcare, a lack of resources, or perhaps just coordination of those supports and resources where we can look to maybe our school social workers, again, our school counselors, our family resource centers, or FAC centers, all of those community supports that are part of your system will again be considered as part of this process. We always ask teams to perhaps stop and pause and think about these extrinsic factors and how do we support our families, our students, so that again, students have what they need so that they're ready to learn. So, as we think of extrinsic factors, that in and of itself will be a core part of our intervention as we look at the various interventions and document them, because we always know document, 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 this will give us the valuable information, the data, if you will, through observations and collections of information and interventions so that we can further progress monitor. We would suggest that always progress monitoring on any intervention takes maybe 3, 4, 6 weeks, depending on that intervention, to really see it come to fruition, to help and assist and guide families, parents, guardians, students, staff in ensuring that those interventions are provided with fidelity and importantly, as you've heard in prior sessions to today, and part of our work is an advocacy to ensure that we ask this very important question, as all multilingual learners require comprehensive ELD as their core, not as an intervention, but their tier one core comprehensive ELD. So the question would be, what does designated ELD look like? For how long? Has that training and support provider, the designated ELD teacher, been provided with training on the ELD standards? How to assist and support students with engaging in collaborative conversations, assisting students again with sharing and relaying information and highlighting key vocabulary and are using primary language resources where necessary. As we consider the interventions, how does your system document the outcomes? That's a very important part of the process. As again, with all other appendices, this one too is downloadable and usable. You can fill it out, adjust it as you see appropriate. But again, we'll provide you another opportunity to look at ways to document those interventions. So, as we consider this process, it is cyclical. It's constantly being an iterative process where we consider interventions and supports based on the varied needs of the student. It may also require us, again, as I mentioned, to bring in additional partners, additional collaborative partners in the discussion, because perhaps it is deeper physical needs, healthcare needs, our school nurse, our health technicians, those available at your school sites. Perhaps we're thinking about primary resources as well, where there may be food insufficiencies in the home and other factors that are inhibiting the student from being totally present and accessible to learning. This particular appendix, English Learner Initial Referral and Decision Making Process, is but one flow chart, if you will. A huge thanks to the San Diego Unified School District. They have another supporting document, which is called the SEP-EL. If you're looking for a comprehensive guide, aside from the California Practitioner's Guide, this resource may also be a supportive resource as you're thinking about pre-referral practices and how your district comes around and supports together as a system all multilingual learners and their progress. So as we think of pre-referral strategies, student queue and fail check, I'm hoping you're thinking, what does that look like at our site? How do we engage in these processes and who are our partners? A large part of our partners, as we know, is also parents and families. When we consider the needs of parents and guardians, it's very important that through this initial referral process and pre-referral process, that we engage as collaborative partners. Because as we look at data-based intentional teaching, that absolutely also includes all pieces and aspects of data. We're considering the data intentional teaching in the classroom, both through English language arts, all core instruction, and specifically through comprehensive ELD, considering what does integrated ELD look like and designated ELD look like, the protected time integrated through all content areas. Does the student have the supports and scaffold necessary to be successful? And a large part of that is also culture and linguistically responsive pedagogy. As we think about culture and linguistically responsive, we come back to not just what are the needs of the student, but as administrators, our role in supporting and assisting our staff. Very importantly, we've heard, in different sessions where teachers themselves will say, I think I had some instruction as I was clearing my B clad or my clad. I haven't revisited the ELD goals in some time. Or some teachers feeling they need some more support and coaching when it comes to how to implement and utilize the ELD standards in the classroom, the ELD adoption and how to support and ensure that the assessments that are included as part of that adoption truly are accessible to the learner given that child's multilingual learner needs. And as we consider 4 to 6 week trials, again, interventions, responsiveness, knowing that again, comprehensive ELD is not an intervention, but tier one, core. When we think of LCAP, basic services, comprehensive ELD is a basic service for our students who are multilingual learners. But this gives us an opportunity to analyze the interventions. Have those interventions been conducted with fidelity? Is there differentiation? Last session, there was a conversation about tiers of intervention and targeting perhaps the domains. As we look at the summative LPAC scores, what do those domains tell us about students' English language acquisition skills? And how can we then plan our interventions based on those needs in those areas where the student is struggling in very specific domains? That gives us much information to support our work. As we continue to make those adjustments, interventions, and further assess what are universal tools that exist in your system, what are benchmarks assessments that help you in assisting and assessing an ongoing dialogue and conversation about, again, how do we assist and support the student to be successful. In addition, accessibility tools are very important. As we consider accessibility tools, we think back to what are those accessibility tools? Universal tools, designated, embedded, and non embedded tools that are accessible to any and all students. Your student study teams, student success teams have the ability to make those decisions about what embedded accessibility tools might be utilized in the classroom that mimic or look like those provided on our CASP assessments. So, as we think about this process and we pause and process for a little bit, I'm going to give you just a few minutes to think about what is your documented pre referral process? What does that look like? What are your current pre referral practices? What are the progress monitoring methods and tools that are appropriate for your multilingual learners? And of course, where you have questions, these are good questions. Maybe you'll take them back to your respective school site and ask, maybe it's your SST lead, or if not yourself, who's designated to, again, host or chair these student study teams. And very importantly, this last question, might they contain language biases that are affecting your data? The assessments that we create, teacher based assessments, benchmark tools that perhaps have been created within your system or school site, we think about, do they have any potential language biases, whether explicit or implicit? It's important that we step back and really consider again what are culture and relevant pedagogy and processes, and how does that interplay with our assessment practices and design of those assessments. So these are some important questions to think about. I'm going to pause just for a moment, give you some time in the chat if you have any questions. I know that Lupita and Christina are monitoring the chat. I'll open the chat as well over to the side, just in case there are any lingering questions. As I go quickly, because I actually want you to think about this for a little bit, because a resource that I'd like you to review is this one. So, as I speak, I'd really like you to download this particular resource. This pre referral flowchart describes 4 key components to consider prior to referral for assessment for potential eligibility for special education. I hope that it's useful to you. When I created it in its inception, I needed a visual. I'm a visual person. I am definitely a yellow, and I need a checklist. I need something to help and support. It does have various embedded links to assist you in this journey as you dig deeper into whichever respective section really calls to you as perhaps an area of need, an area that perhaps your teams haven't fully explored, or maybe where you just have some outlying questions. What I also hope is that as you go through the flow chart, perhaps there are areas where you're definitely saying, your team has got this, because there are many promising practices. So, if you feel so inclined to do so, feel free to enter any promising practices that you use in your pre referral process in the chat box. We love to hear pre referral practices that have worked, resources that are working for you, because it's always helpful to share with each other as friends. That is part of our collective commitment as we leverage. So, take a moment to just kind of scroll through, and you'll see there considering, and I'll just read the headings for you, it's considering extrinsic factors. And again, as I mentioned, thinking about, are there primary contributors other than language, other than a disability? So, primary contributors that are affecting academic or behavioral challenges, such as social, emotional, mental health, or psychological factors. Those factors, again, may be impediments to the student's learning, where with further support, we could see success. Furthermore, we could consider personal and culture factors. The more that we are culturally sensitive and understand the background and information that parents bring to the table, parents and guardians can give us a wealth of information about primary language needs, whether the student has had any difficulty in their primary language with processing information, understanding information, and considering all of the cultural factors, perhaps parents and guardians need further support. Again, and how to engage, how to again be part of our educational system, where we often know we have many acronyms, processes that may again be very difficult for parents to navigate when they're maybe new to the country, new to the educational system in the US. So, in this particular section, there are some hyperlinks there. There's a great resource, family engagement toolkit that was put out by the California Department of Education, that might be a resource that you'd like to lean into also. The next one is considering language development. Of course, very important. As we think of language development, as we mentioned, examining comprehensive ELD. And it truly is about an examination of what does comprehensive ELD look like. There are some hyperlinks in that particular, and maybe we need the Padlet in the chat again. Um, as we look at these particular resources and we're looking at comprehensive ELD, there are some classroom observation appendices and forms in the document, the infographic that I've shared here, where you might want to download any of those documents. Again, you can brand them, reuse them as you see appropriate, because as we conduct classroom observations, and it may be that you enlist again the support of your allies who are your EL specialist. Maybe it's a literacy coach, a language development coach, a TOSA, again, to examine that environment, assist the teacher where there may be needs. Because as together we look at the needs of the student as an English learner, it's important to also know that our teachers need support, maybe more so now than ever, and they may need a supportive partner, someone to talk to be coached and mentored as they consider again those ELA, ELD frameworks, what it looks like in the classroom, how students are provided opportunities to again engage in speaking, reading, and writing skills, and supports where needed in respect to primary language resources. There are some additional information when we consider learning environments and accessibility resources. The California matrix is also included there in this particular infographic, and conducting those focus observations will also assist your team with considering what are some of those technology needs. In an era where we have so many students with one-to-one devices, it gives us opportunities again to further utilize those Google add-ons, those softwares, intervention programs, etc., as appropriate to meet the individual learner's needs. So we have opportunities to focus and support students in many different ways than we possibly did before. I think we've kind of opened up this opportunity to really look at what are our tiers of intervention and targeting those tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions based on specific assessment data and information that we've gathered to then fully support students. As always, I always have to share as a special educator and in respect of IDEA, our child find processes are important. We acknowledge that students may be referred for special education anytime, but what we are asking everyone and encouraging is that everyone stop and consider and think about all of these necessary components prior to a referral for special education, because our goal again is neither to under identify nor over identify multilingual learners as students with disabilities. And yet, if there is a suspicion, and despite all interventions and supports, then yes, we definitely would want students referred and fully and comprehensively assessed to identify if there is in fact a disability and provide any necessary IDEA special education related supports and services. So again, take this information with your team. You do have a note taking guide to support you with some of these reflective questions if you choose to reuse any of this information. The CUME file check form, extrinsic factors forms, intervention summary, the flow chart, and the pre-referral flow chart that I just shared with you are all accessible to you, free to utilize as you see appropriate. These particular resources, again, we hope will assist and support you. Another main factor with this process, though, that we know is this topic, language difference versus disability, because we acknowledge, as again indicated by the many professionals and experts that contributed to the California Practitioners Guide, that this is a focal question of many of your team's discussions of deciphering, is this a language difference or is it in fact a disability? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lupita and she'll continue through this session and I'll moderate the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you, everyone. We've shared a lot of information and resources for you to think about as you are contemplating and reflecting upon your current pre-referral practices. And one very important topic, a concept that we share and we get a lot of tremendous feedback on is this particular one that we're going to cover in just a few minutes. And it involves understanding the importance, how important it is for us in our respective fields and roles and scopes of work to understand and be able to distinguish between learning behaviors that are commonly seen in second language acquisition compared to indicators of a possible learning disability, because there are similarities and we want to make sure that we dissect the two and address the two respectively should we come to the conclusion that the student definitely need some additional supports outside of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports that would effectively lead to the assessment of a possible learning disability. So with that, I want to offer you a little bit of time to kind of establish some common understanding by sharing a short video clip. And then I want to be able to offer you a purpose for viewing. And before we view the video clip, I want you to think about your current practices and listen for what is familiar to you. What are some of the practices that are being called out by this expert in the field regarding language difference and disabilities, and what to think about as we're approaching a situation where a student is still struggling, and what things to ask of ourselves and of our system. And also think about what may not be in place or what questions come to mind that you may want to further explore. So again, as you are viewing the video clip, be thinking about what resonates with you. What are some practices that we have in place? What are some things that I may want to explore a little bit further? And feel free to drop those in the chat as you're viewing the video clip.
Generally, a lot of us have questions regarding, is this a language difference, or is this language development, or second language development, or is it disability? And part of it, regardless what our various disciplines are, is to really have a pretty healthy depth of understanding around what types of predictable programming can students count on that's going to be effective that's going to be successful? How do we really plan for working with the complex, diverse differences of students? And then how do we look for what's working and how can we make it work better? And when that occurs, we're much more sure that our programming is optimal. And there are a variety of different ways to measure that, both from what are we doing to help build relationships with students, help them feel like they're active trusted members of their classrooms, what kinds of just sociocultural things can we do to build strong relationships with our students and their families. When we engage students in paired and group work, how are we basing that on creating those strong collaborative partnerships with students? How much attention are we paying to issues of second language acquisition in terms of sort of the developmental process of acquiring a new language? And every state has standards regarding their students, English learners, level of English language development, and how much are we targeting instruction to each student's specific level of language and literacy development. So that's an important element. When it comes to the academic or subject matter, how are we sure that we're providing an instructional program that's based on our students' prior learning, and we can build from that, and that's using materials that are appropriate for our students? And then lastly, how are we really ensuring that we're helping students think about what we're teaching and helping them learn to do that? So part of it is really thinking about learning as a four-pronged process, regardless of who our students are and where they're coming from. First, how are we building connections with their personal, cultural, world and language knowledge? Second, how are we paying attention to their level of language and literacy development? Third, how are we paying attention to their prior schooling or prior knowledge in the subject matter we're teaching? And then fourth, in what ways are we helping students sort of think to learn? And what does that look like? And what should instructional conversations look like based on our students' level of literacy? And when we do that, we have a wonderful chance of helping students be more successful. And then when that's layered with, if we more properly identify students with disabilities and provide an educational program that really helps provide interventions that are found to be effective, we can do many wonderful things with all English learners.
So hopefully you had some time to reflect as you were listening to the video clip about what are some current practices. What do you see from your perspective, your lens, your role in the field in support of English learners who continue to struggle? And there was a key question in the previous slide regarding what does the team do? What is the process that the multidisciplinary team has in place to be able to determine and distinguish whether the reason for the students struggling has to do with perhaps not receiving the appropriate supports in the general education setting, that is tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Most importantly, comprehensive English language development, as well as identifying what particular areas of need have surfaced and how are those addressed through the different tiers of support. But also, equally importantly, is other factors that impact learning, such as the one that Debbie walked us through prior to talking about this topic. Things such as food insecurity, health, and other factors that we absolutely want to take into consideration as we're painting a comprehensive picture of what students need, what they're able to do, what types of supports are working for them, and then what areas might we need to still continue to explore and gather information about. So back to the topic of language difference versus disability, this is an important question to ask of ourselves and to ask of each other. And I actually want to circle back to something that Debbie shared earlier today when we were looking at our referral wheel. She mentioned two very important things that are critical, and for us as administrators are things that we want to continue to ask ourselves. And the two things that she said were communication and collaboration. So each one of us here today carries a very unique and distinct responsibility. And as we talk about in this topic, language difference versus disability, maybe you are the English learner lead, or maybe you are the site administrator with some English learner background, or maybe you are the special education director. And so you want to bring that lens to the table and reach out and lean on your respective colleagues that may have the information that you're not a fully, knee deep in per se, right? So what's unique about our team, I want to kind of bring that back to the forefront, is that we bring those lenses to the table and we lean on each other and ask each other questions as we're building these types of supports for you, because we want to, again, give us a place and a space to talk about what is the communication that we need to establish and how are we going to move forward in developing collaborative opportunities, general education, special education, EL department, so that we can tighten up our systems and ensure that all of our students, particularly our English learners who will continue to struggle within our systems, in providing the supports that they need, and making sure that when we refer them for special education assessment for possible services, that indeed we've attempted with all the other supports that are afforded to us. So again, as we ask ourselves this question, we want to share this resource with you. And again, just to reiterate, all of the resources we're sharing with you today, you can access them directly on the slide deck. We have provided live links on there, either through the titles or the images, as well as in chapter 3 of the Padlet. All of those are for today's resource. So again, how do we know? How do we ensure that our students' related needs, if they are indeed a language difference, it's just a normal manifestation of how they're acquiring the second language, or if their struggles are attributed to a possible learning disability? That's a very important question to consider. And how we offer you an opportunity to explore that for yourselves and perhaps for staffs is through this activity that we've developed. So we have just a little bit of time, at least, to get you to become familiar with this resource. And as you explore it, if somebody could drop it in the chat for me, again, you can access it directly through the slide deck. As you explore this resource, this activity, please be thinking about, number one, how might you use this resource as an administrator, as a person in a position of leadership, in a position of decision-making power? How might you use this resource? And then as you explore it and become more familiar with at least how we've designed it to help you kind of dig in and build some common knowledge around language difference versus disability, who might you want to share it with first? And how might this be part of really developing a system that encompasses learning from both camps, right? General education and special education, so that we can learn together. And again, going back to those two powerful key things that Debbie shared with us, communication and collaboration to support the needs of our kiddos. So looking at the time, I'm mindful of the time, I think we can give you about 3 minutes to explore the jigsaw. And then feel free to drop in the chat any questions or insights that you may have, learnings and wonderings that you may have regarding your personal learning with this activity. And then also feel free to share in the chat how might you use this resource and who might you want to share it with. So I'll be quiet for just a couple of minutes to give you some think time and explore time. Feel free to drop in the chat any ideas that come to mind in terms of how might you professionally in your leadership role use this resource, and also who might you want to share it with as you begin to explore how to communicate with others who are not in your scope of work or in your office per se, as well as how you plan to collaborate with others in support of English learners with disabilities around this topic. There's a question regarding L1 and L2. L1 is the primary language, L2 is the second language. So thank you for asking that question. Okay, folks, I'd like to bring you back and know that we've provided this resource for you Oops, let me go back. Sorry. We provided this resource for you in the Padlet. And again, you can download it and rework it to address your very specific needs. The way that we designed it can be used in a Zoom room, what we call the Zoom room, in a breakout room setting, or you could print it out and just have people, talk about each one of those tables, create posters or table copies, and just have people come together, explore, and have a dialogue around what they notice and what they wonder, and come together to the understanding of how important it is to distinguish the differences and the similarities as students are learning a second language and continue to struggle. I think bringing that to the surface is a good way to start establishing some communication and collaboration between leaders, both from general education and special education. So again, coming back to these two questions. So how does the multidisciplinary team currently, your current team, explore these differences? And then what types of assessments are being used, whether they're formal or informal, to be able to gather data that points us either in the direction of we need to provide more supports in language acquisition, language development, before we make the determination that perhaps the student indeed needs some additional assessment that may lead to possible special education services. So what are some of those assessment tools or practices that are in place? And if they're not, it's a good question to ask of yourselves and of your colleagues of where might you come to the table and start thinking about that this is absolutely a gap that we need to address. So for that, we have, again, a student scenario. We're going to reintroduce Cruzita. We lovingly call her Cruzita. And at this point, Cruz, our student scenario sample, is in this particular scenario, find that the example provides different examples of how Cruz has been supported through the tiers of support, and yet she continues to struggle. So at this point, when you read through the student scenario, you're going to see the different opportunities offered to Cruz as the team and the teachers and the parents are engaging in very deliberately and intentionally addressing her unique needs. So again, the student scenarios are a wonderful resource within each of the chapters of the practitioner's guide to give us some concrete examples of the topics that we are talking about that are housed in each one of those chapters. So I encourage you, along with the resources that we're sharing with you today, to revisit the student scenario. I know Cruz is 7 years old, and for those of you joining us at the secondary level, you may think, well, that doesn't really pertain to, my scope of work. I challenge you to read through the scenarios and think of it through the lens of your current systems and practices rather than the age group of the kiddo, because the supports that are offered to a 7-year-old who is struggling, English learner who is struggling, that we're thinking about possibly need special education services, apply for a middle schooler and a high school student. Language difference versus disability is a topic that we can discuss across the board. And given the information that we have about the student is how we're going to shape the conversation. The scenario will give you as a leader some background and some talking points, if you will, as you move forward with the respective areas and grades that teams that you're working with. So with that, I want to offer you, we have 5 more minutes on the clock, offer you some time to reflect and drop in the chat some new learnings and some wonderings that you have around the topics that we've covered today. And Debbie, as you guys are doing that, I want to hand it back to Debbie to see if we have any final words from our leader. And again, we're going to hang around and wait for the last person to leave this room before we close shop. And again, I want to thank you for your engagement and participation. Debbie?
Thank you. Thank you, Lupita. Thank you for everyone joining today as we talk about this much needed topic about what are our pre-referral and referral practices. Next session, as we will see you again soon, we hope, is all things regarding culturally and linguistically appropriate assessment practices. when in fact you've gone through interventions and progress monitoring and there is a potential suspicion for disability as an administrator, what will you look out for to ensure that your teams are engaging in culturally and linguistically appropriate practices? As always, we love to hear your questions. Please drop them in the chat. Any new learnings, wonderings that you might have, we will hang back for another 5 minutes in case there are any questions that you have lingering or that maybe came to mind during our session. We hope again that you'll use and reuse any of the information and resources that we've shared with you today as you build up your collective commitment in your respective school site, county office, and or SELPA, as again, we all work together to achieve improved outcomes for English learners, as our multilingual learners absolutely need our support as we work together. So with that, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording. All these recordings at the very end will be placed onto our Padlet and sent to you via the OMS link where you registered originally. So again, we thank you for your participation, for joining us today. We'll turn off that recording in case maybe, just maybe, someone wants to unmute and ask a question before you log out. If not, have a wonderful rest of your week. We thank you again.